What do you think keeps musicians away from focused practice versus playing? Like, can you share some practice tips with us?
Yeah, so I think some of this is the inner game of tennis stuff, right? And I think that we kind of all need to do a shake up on what counts as work, right? And I have my son is 11 and he's been studying with piano with me for many, many years, and he's the only student I've ever had in my life who I've lived with, right? Like I haven't lived with any of my students before. And a lot of times I think people are like, well, I've got to practice 30 minutes or I've got to play my song 3 times or I've got to do my vocal warm up and then work on my song 3 times. And I don't think people really understand that practice is an agent of change, right? Practice is when you go in and you roll up your sleeves and you do the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you start with the ugly and you work on the bad. And so that's always what I try to help my students and the members in my membership to stop and really think, what is it that, first of all, setting a goal, right? A long-term goal of like, what's the point of all of this, right? It's like super macro goal. And I do this for everybody. Maybe the goal is that they have auditions for college auditions, and that's the big goal of the year. Maybe the goal is they want to get from level 3 to level 4. Maybe the goal is they want to learn, they've been playing jazz, they want to learn pop, whatever that big goal is. And then we start to set weekly goals of like, well, what are you going to do between now and when I see you next week? What's going to happen? And to have people learn to be able to self-assess and say to themselves, did I make any progress today? What did I do? What was the agent of change? And that can be something like, 16 bars of a piece and you start working on the next 16 bars of the piece, or that you turn the metronome and you do that work on. So this is the way that I try to really have people to start to look that way themselves. And I think a lot of people come into lessons, the culture that we're in too now, where we give so much direction to everybody and they require so much like support, is to be teaching my students to do some of that work themselves. This is what I'm listening for. Are you noticing? Using a lot of that terminology until someone can say, I don't have to wait for my teacher to tell me what to do next. I can stop and say, what do I think is the next thing?
Wow. And these are actually life skills. When you think about it, a piano lesson and the journey of being a musician and studying an instrument and the discipline it takes to practice, these are lifelong skills that you can apply to anything in life.
Right. And I mean, that's the whole point, is that nobody else is going to be running the show for you unless you're in kind of an unhappy situation and someone's running the show for you. But to have people feel empowered and be able to ask those questions of themselves. And again, my son is now learning an instrument with somebody who's not me. He's taking clarinet lessons with a good friend of mine. And it's the same thing
Wow.
where he's like, well, she just told me to play my scales. And I'm like, well, did you put the metronome on? Oh, well, no, she didn't tell me to. It's like, well, why do we do all of these things? Like think beyond what is required of you and ask, what can you really do for yourself? Are you counting? Are you playing legato? Like asking all of those questions. And so this requires that we teach our students what the parameters are, like what is it that our goal is, or what we're working towards, and then encouraging people to take the next steps.
Absolutely. It builds self-awareness, it builds confidence.
Absolutely.
Ah, I love that. And I just want to get your thoughts on where we are in terms of music education as a society nowadays.
Well, that's a big question.
I know. Did I just open a can of worms? I probably did.
Yeah, it's a can of worms. Well, what I would say is, the fact that there are so many specialized music programs all over North America and all over the world, I think is great. The fact that there are, CCM programs, contemporary commercial music programs, and it's not just classical or bust, or classical or jazz or bust. Now that there are lots of other options. So that's a really great thing, that you can go and, specialize in all of these things. I think the danger comes when we get to a level of specialization that gets to be silly, where people are like focused so deep into one frame of mind that they're not actually working on being a complete musician. And I think that is something that everybody needs to really think about, that if you get into a super hyper specialized place, and you're missing a lot of other skills, then you're actually going to be at a severe disadvantage when you actually get out into the world. I don't know very many people who are working only in their specialty. I mean, like Rihanna Gibbons, who just won the Pulitzer, like she's pretty specialized in what she's doing, but she just won a Pulitzer, so that's cool. But the rest of us are doing a mishmash of things, and we really need to have a breadth of skills. This is hence why I started this whole company, The Versatile Musician, because I think versatility not only helps in employment and vocation, in opportunity, but it also helps for you to have more access to more artistic resources as well. And so if you're a singer-songwriter and you don't play an instrument, you're going to be severely limited by that. If you're a singer-songwriter and your rhythm skills aren't really strong, then you're going to be severely, held back by that when you're trying to work with a band. If you're a pianist who have no singing skills or no knowledge of vocal pedagogy, I think it's the same thing. I think for all of us, it's really important that we be keeping our eyes on the fact that we really want to be complete, versatile musicians.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. There's something to be said about learning piano as an adult. I just want to cover that because I have many clients who come to singing later in life, and they did take piano as a child, but something got in the way and they didn't continue with it. And very often they're interested in maybe going back and studying it because they realize the value, just like you had articulated before. Can you tell us what it would look like for an adult to go back to studying piano?
Well, it does. It's not a big deal. It's really not. And that's, I think, what I'm always trying to explain to people, that whatever their experience, I know a lot of people who have trauma around their piano experience because it was taught in the traditional way. And I think, again, there are certain wonderful things about the traditional way, but one of the limiting things is, for me, I went through the Royal Conservatory of Music, which I think is fabulous, and my son is going through it right now. But the issue that I had with it is it was very disjointed from what was important to me. I didn't understand what the scales and the technique stuff was for. It was just felt to me like a punishment. And I didn't really have a strong sense of the ear training was exercises. It was, so I think addressing that first with people and clarifying, like, what is it that we're trying to do? What's the purpose of this? It's not just a random set of things you do because teacher says so. So once I clear that concept up, then we go into really simple stuff like, how do you play major and minor chords in 12 keys? Because once you can do that, you can play every song. Literally every song in the Western canon is comprised of major and minor triads. And sure, maybe there's some other notes added in too, but if that's all you do, that's a really great place to start. And if you can start from there and just some very basic treble clef reading, then you've got somebody who's empowered, who's engaged, and that can happen over the period of a few weeks. I've worked with students who have never played in their lives, and within 2 lessons, they can play Let It Be on the piano and sing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's so inspiring to hear that.
Sometimes in one lesson, if that's all we're doing. Yeah, we can do it very, very quickly. It's a minutes instead of months kind of thing.
It's never too late.
Right. It's never too late. And for a lot of people, a huge amount of folks that are in my studio now are actually, not intending to go on and have a professional career in music. They're doing it for fun and for joy. And it's like some of my favorite people to work with because, they're there for the right reasons. They practice because it's their recreation, it's their expression. And it's really been wonderful to work with people. I have two guys that started the same week. This is here in the studio in the city. And both of them came. They wanted to learn jazz piano. Neither of them had ever played piano before.
Wow.
And that was in October. We're in May. And both of them can play at a level where I could send them to go and play in a jazz band. Like, they have the skills. And it wasn't a big deal. And it's been really, really fun. And they had busy weeks and slow weeks, where they had time to practice and time not to practice. And it's been really incredible to see what they're able to do.
So they had no prior piano training. That's
0.
amazing.
One of them had played flute as a young child. The other had never played music before. And they're having both of them are having a blast. And it's been a terrific experience, for all of us. It's been so much fun.
I love that because it gives me hope. Very often I take a piano lesson with my jazz teacher in town. And whenever I take the lesson, I feel really challenged in the lesson. I feel like it's a brain workout. And afterwards, I feel like I've gone to therapy. Now, it won't replace therapy.
Right, of course not.
But I gotta say, it's so therapeutic. Like something happens and I feel alive again after my piano lesson.
Yeah, it's a fabulous thing. I have a woman who studies with me who's in her early 70s, and she said she could do crossword puzzles or she could do piano. And I mean, it's funny for her to say that because she is a really fantastic singer and pianist. I mean, she's really wonderful. I would send her out to work in gigs, like she's that great. But it's something that is fantastic for you and is enjoyable to do.
That's so awesome. Well, just a couple more questions and then I'll let you
Absolutely.
go because I know you got a long day ahead of you, but your career has taken you to international stages. What do you do to prepare for performance?
Oh, okay. Well, I prepare the same way I sort of described, when you asked me about practicing.
Yes.
So this is something that I kind of discovered when I released a very sort of, for me, challenging album in 2013 or 2014 when my son was only one. He was 1 year old, and I was preparing to do this album of complicated music. And I realized that I didn't have the hours that I used to have. And so what I made is what I call the poop list.
I love it.
I have a practice download that I give a lot of my students, and it has the poop list on it. And basically what it is it's what needs to be done. It's like a to-do list. What needs to be done on each of the songs. Not every song needs to be played all the way through and sung all the way through. Sometimes there's a few chords that I'm struggling with. Sometimes it's a vocal range thing, or it's a lyric thing. Sometimes it's like the solo section where I need to improvise, I'm having difficulty with, and I make a very, very specific list of things that need to be done. So when I have 20 minutes to sit and play between students, I can sit down, I have a list, and I play. And so I did a solo concert a couple weeks ago. It was the first full 90-minute solo concert I've done since the pandemic. And I was doing a lot of really challenging music, literally solo, just me, myself, doing a lot of really complicated stuff. And I did the same thing. I brought the poop list back and, made the list of all the things that needed to be done. And, I sat and worked on it and then ran the list a couple of times and I was done. So it was really works for me every single time.
That sounds so efficient because
Yeah.
I think a lot of times musicians and singers burn themselves out by rehearsing everything from beginning to end.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something to be said about that too. Like sometimes that is also extremely important to take the time to do that. So I don't neglect that. I know my process really well, but I would say for most people, they're not practicing the poop list way enough, that they should be making the list of what needs to be done and tackling those kinds of things. With music, it's hard to tell, like, when is it done? When is it done? But what you can do is think of things as being, as having a to-do list. Like if you do the laundry, you know that the laundry isn't done if it's all over the floor, right? You know that you haven't finished cleaning the bathroom if there's a bucket of water with a mop still in it. And so I think it's identifying the parameters of what does it mean when something is done? Like what does that look like? What does that entail?
Did you hear that, everyone? Create a poop list.
The poop list.
The poop list.
It used to be called something else that maybe was more like swearing, but I decided I should change it because let's not make it inappropriate for people. So it's the poop list.
Yeah.
It sounds cuter that way.
I love that. That's a huge takeaway for me. And I hope to share that with my clients. So
Please do.